My name is Sienna Carter, and I was 29 years old when my mother decided that throwing me out of her house was not enough. She wanted a crowd for it. She wanted music and food and witnesses. She wanted neighbors standing around with paper plates in their hands while she played the role of exhausted single mother, finally setting a boundary with her ungrateful daughter. When I pulled into the driveway that Saturday afternoon to pick up the last box of my belongings, the first thing I saw was a huge vinyl banner hanging over the garage. "Goodbye, freeloader Don T. Come back." The grill smoke drifted across the front yard. Country music blasted from a cheap speaker near the patio. Somebody had strung up little red and white pennants across the fence like it was a summer cookout instead of a public humiliation. At first, I just sat there with both hands still on the steering wheel. I remember the heat inside the car and the way the sunlight bounced off the windshield. I remember hearing laughter before I even opened the door. Then my Uncle Rob staggered into view from the patio, red-faced, beer bottle in hand, already drunk enough to forget what volume was. He squinted toward my car and shouted loud enough for the neighbors 2 houses down to hear that maybe now my mother could finally stop feeding a grown woman who had never built a real career. Someone laughed. Another voice joined in and said, "I should be ashamed." Then something soft and greasy hit the side of my car and slid down the door. My younger brother Tate was doubled over laughing beside the cooler. He pointed at the hot dog now smeared against the paint and yelled that there was my last free meal. Even the kids from next door started laughing because children learn very quickly what kind of cruelty gets approved by adults. I stepped out of the car and the sound seemed to sharpen. Plates clinked. A lawn chair scraped the patio. Somebody muttered, "There she is." My mother Dana turned from the grill with a pair of tongs in one hand and the smile she always wore when she thought she had total control of the room. She looked beautiful in a cold, deliberate way. White shorts, gold hoop earrings, perfect hair. Her sunglasses sat on top of her head like a crown. She spread her arms as if she were greeting an honored guest and not the daughter she had just made into entertainment. "Look who finally came to collect her junk," she called out. A few people laughed harder. It was that easy for them. I had spent years making their lives easier, quieter, more stable, and all it took was one banner and a few ugly jokes for them to decide I had always been the burden in the story. But that was the thing about families like mine. They repeat a lie so often that by the time they say it out loud in public, it no longer feels like a lie to them. It feels like history. I did not yell back. I did not cry. I did not ask my mother what kind of woman celebrates throwing out her own child. I walked past all of them and into the house. The music from outside sounded muffled through the walls. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the lemon cleaner I had bought last month because my mother liked the expensive kind, but had claimed money was tight. I moved through the hallway and into the mudroom where my last box sat on the bench. There was a plastic grocery bag on top of it with a note written in thick black marker. Starter kit. Inside the bag were instant noodles, dryer sheets, a half-used bottle of dish soap, and a printed list of apartment complexes in the area. It was so childish I almost laughed. That was what struck me most that day. Not just the cruelty, the effort. They had planned little details. They had taken time to stage my humiliation. I picked up the box, tucked it against my hip, and walked back through the kitchen to the front door. When I stepped outside again, the backyard crowd fell into that hungry half-silence people get when they think the real show is about to start. My Uncle Rob raised his beer and shouted that my poor mother had carried me long enough. Then he said something about my late father being ashamed if he could see me now. That was the only line that really cut, because he knew exactly where to stick the knife. My father had been dead for 8 years. Rob knew that. He smiled while he said it. Tate laughed and grabbed another hot dog from the tray like he was considering throwing a second one. My mother did not stop any of it. She just stood there with her tongs, chin lifted, letting the moment happen because leadership in a toxic family is often just permission for everyone else to be as cruel as they want. I set the box in my trunk. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and turned toward the garage. I framed the banner and the people standing under it. My mother by the grill, Rob on the patio, Tate near the cooler, the neighbors smiling in that careful, detached way people do when they want the fun of witnessing something ugly without taking responsibility for it. I took one clear photo. My mother saw me and frowned. "What is that for?" she asked. "Your pity diary." I looked straight at her, and for the first time since arriving, I spoke. "No," I said. "For later." Then I got into my car, backed out of the driveway, and left without another word. They were still laughing when I turned the corner. 2 weeks later, my phone would light up with messages from all three of them begging me to call back. But in that moment, they thought they had won. They thought they had just filmed the final scene of my humiliation. What they had actually done was capture the exact second before their safety net drove away. The version my family told everyone was clean and simple in the way that humiliating stories often are. I was almost 30, unmarried, living back at home, and working from a laptop doing a job none of them respected because none of them fully understood it. In their version, I had returned to my mother's house after life failed to launch. I stayed too long. I contributed too little. I drifted around under the roof of a woman kind enough to keep me afloat even though I had not earned it. That story played extremely well at church lunches, neighborhood cookouts, and under passive-aggressive comments on social media, where people love phrases like tough love and wake-up call, and maybe this will finally make her grow up. The truth was less tidy and much less flattering to the people telling it. 3 years earlier, my mother's event rental company had started bleeding money in a way she would never admit out loud. Carter Celebration sounded fancier than it was. On paper, it was a regional event rental and decor service, operating out of Tampa and the surrounding suburbs. They provided folding chairs, linens, centerpieces, tent packages, portable bars, lighting rigs, and assorted rental pieces for weddings, church events, school banquets, and corporate mixers. From the outside, it looked like a healthy small business. The trucks had decals. The warehouse had a polished reception area. My mother dressed sharply, knew everyone by name, and could talk for 20 minutes without saying anything useful, which many people mistake for leadership. But the inside of the business was chaos held together by denial. Inventory was miscounted constantly. Deposits were logged inconsistently. Vendor bills got paid late and then blamed on clerical errors. One manager quit after being blamed for a scheduling disaster that was actually my mother's fault. Insurance paperwork kept lapsing because nobody tracked renewals. The company's software was being held together by old passwords and backup cards my mother could never remember. One warehouse lease was 2 months from default by the time I discovered it. A florist had nearly blacklisted the company over unpaid replacement costs for damaged vases. By the time I moved back in after my own lease ended, Carter Celebrations was functioning the way some people drive with the check engine light on for months. They keep moving by refusing to look directly at the problem. My job was not glamorous enough for my family to respect. I worked remotely as an operations and contracts coordinator. I helped small businesses organize vendor paperwork, fix broken bidding processes, clean up service agreements, track compliance deadlines, and catch the kind of administrative mistakes that cost people real money. It paid well because most business owners hate detail work and are terrible at it. I was very good at systems. I saw breakdowns early. I could take a mess of half-missing records and turn it into a sequence somebody could actually follow. That made me valuable to strangers and almost invisible to my family. My mother saw me working from a laptop in a quiet room and decided that meant my labor was somehow less real than hers. If she could not see sweat, then it did not count. At first, I only meant to help temporarily. She asked me to look over some invoices because the girl handling billing had left abruptly. I fixed one overdue account. Then I found a delivery contract with incorrect pricing. Then I realized several event deposits had been recorded without being properly reserved against upcoming purchase orders. Then I saw that one of her trucks was operating under an insurance file that was about to expire. Every time I fixed one thing, two more surfaced behind it. My mother hated admitting she needed help, so she developed another habit instead. She minimized what I did until it sounded like typing. If a client called in a panic because their wedding install sheet had the wrong quantities, and I corrected it before they canceled, my mother would later tell people I mostly just answered emails. If I built a spreadsheet that showed which packages were actually profitable, she'd say I liked organizing things and leave it at that. If I covered a rushed vendor payment to prevent a Friday setup from collapsing, she'd shrug and say, "Families help families." That line came up all the time. Families help families. It was a beautiful sentence as long as nobody asked why it only seemed to apply when my time, my money, or my stability were the things being taken. I paid more than people knew. I did not announce it because at first I thought I was being practical. I covered software renewals when accounts declined. I paid a warehouse utility balance once to prevent a lockout because my mother said she would handle it and then forgot. I floated replacement linen costs after one event returned items stained beyond salvage. I advanced fuel money when one of the trucks needed to leave at dawn and the company card kept declining. I covered shipping on replacement decor when my mother forgot to confirm an order. I sent Tate money for rent twice because my mother said business was weird and she could not help him that week. He never repaid me. None of them did. My brother learned early that I was the easiest person to borrow from because I made excuses for everyone. My Uncle Rob drifted in and out of the business doing deliveries badly and making promises he could not keep. My grandmother Elise disguised every insult as concern. Dana is only trying to teach you responsibility. Tate is young. Rob means well when he is sober. I was always expected to translate their behavior into something softer. That is one of the secret jobs toxic families assign. Somebody has to keep the story from sounding as ugly as it is. Usually, it lands on the person they also resent the most. The more I helped, the less visible my effort became. My mother would make comments while passing through the kitchen like must be nice to work in pajamas. Then an hour later, she'd ask me to rewrite an angry email to a venue manager because she did not want to sound unprofessional. She would joke that I played Office on my computer and then call me at 11 at night because the warehouse staff had loaded the wrong color linens and a wedding planner was threatening to drop them. The truth my family never told anyone was simple. If I had not been there, the company would have collapsed years earlier. They did not know the exact number yet. Neither did I, but I knew enough to understand that I was not living off them. In many ways, they were living off me. What changed everything was not another insult or another request for money or another night spent cleaning up someone else's mess. It was the moment I realized my mother no longer viewed me as a hidden support she resented needing. She genuinely believed her own version of reality. She believed the roof over my head erased every dollar I had poured into that house and business. She believed because I had never invoiced her, the labor counted as love and therefore did not need to be acknowledged. She believed she had carried me. And once she believed that deeply enough, humiliating me in public became not just acceptable, but righteous. That was the week I stopped trying to be understood and started building a record. People like my mother are very good at winning arguments in private. They interrupt, redirect, accuse, cry if necessary, and by the time the conversation ends, you are too tired to explain your own reality clearly. I knew that if I confronted her without preparation, she would turn it into a performance about my ingratitude. So I did the one thing she could not charm or shout over. I made documentation. My revenge did not begin with screaming. It began with spreadsheets, bank statements, saved texts, account histories, and old emails I had once kept only because I am the kind of person who never fully trusts chaos. I built a timeline going back almost 30 months. Every time I covered a business shortfall, it went into a file. Every subscription renewal I paid because the company card declined. Every rush replacement for damaged inventory. Every software fee. Every fuel transfer. Every utility save. Every vendor deposit I fronted. Every call from my mother asking me to fix one small thing that was never actually small. Every message from Rob begging for gas money because he had overdrawn his account again and had an early delivery. Every text from Tate saying he was short this month and Mom said cash flow was weird. Every time I moved money quietly so a public embarrassment would not happen. Then I started tracking unpaid labor, which was harder but still possible. Hours spent rewriting contracts. Hours spent cleaning client communication. Hours spent resolving double bookings, fixing inventory errors, rebuilding install sheets, catching permit and insurance issues, and reorganizing vendor accounts my mother had allowed to become a maze of partial payments and personal excuses. I did not exaggerate. That mattered to me. I wanted conservative numbers because I knew people like my mother always latch onto the slightest rounding issue to discredit the whole truth. If I was going to count, I was going to count carefully. The total made me stare at the screen for a full minute without moving. Business support alone had crossed $94,000. Direct family support pushed it past $107,000. And even that was incomplete because unpaid labor is always undervalued when the person doing it is a daughter instead of a consultant. I printed sample pages first just to make it feel real. Then I sat back and looked around my room. The irony hit me so hard I nearly laughed. The woman my family called a freeloader had quietly been functioning as the unpaid operations backbone of the household and business they mocked her in. Around that same time, one of my regular clients in North Carolina offered me a longer contract. It was not exactly a salaried role, but it was steady enough to support a move. Better rates, bigger scope, stronger referral pipeline. Enough to rent my own place and stop organizing my life around people who only valued me when I was useful and silent. I signed the contract before telling a single soul. I found a one-bedroom apartment outside Charlotte. Nothing fancy, clean complex, good parking, in unit washer and dryer. A balcony with enough space for a chair and a plant. The kind of place you choose not because it impresses anyone, but because your nervous system recognizes quiet when it sees it. I put down the deposit and rented a small storage unit near the highway. Then I started moving my things out in batches so small nobody noticed. Winter coats, kitchen items I had bought myself, my office monitor, personal files, jewelry my grandmother had once implied should be passed down to someone more settled. By the time my mother cornered me in the kitchen with her official announcement, most of what mattered to me was already gone. She chose a Wednesday morning, which was very her. Cruelty delivered on weekdays feels more responsible. I was reviewing a client packet when she walked in with coffee in one hand and that controlled patient expression people wear when they want credit for behavior that would sound monstrous if described honestly. She said she had been thinking a lot and had decided the healthiest thing for both of us was for me to leave by Saturday. She talked about boundaries. She talked about personal growth. She talked about how no respectable man wanted a woman who still leaned on her mother at 29. She said she loved me too much to keep enabling me. That line almost made me admire her. It took real talent to dress vanity up as sacrifice. I let her finish. Then I asked only one question. Do you want me gone or do you want a show when I leave? The smirk that touched the corner of her mouth told me everything. Maybe both, she said. That was the moment the last of my guilt disappeared. She did not want resolution. She wanted spectacle. She wanted the satisfaction of turning me into a cautionary tale in front of an audience that would nod along and congratulate her courage. So I nodded like a woman too ashamed to fight and said fine. By Friday evening, I finished the quiet work. I removed my card from every backup billing method I had quietly tied to company systems. I disconnected my login from their scheduling platform. I forwarded 2 vendor emails without softening my mother's rude phrasing or cleaning up her grammar. I sent a planner the incomplete file my mother had left sitting in drafts, instead of the polished, corrected version I would normally have assembled. I did not sabotage anything. I simply stopped preventing consequences. That distinction mattered. People like my family love to call accountability revenge when it arrives through the absence of unpaid labor. Saturday, I drove back for the last box, mostly because I wanted nothing left in that house that belonged to me. I did not know she had planned the barbecue. I did not know there would be a banner, paper plates, kids laughing, or a hot dog hitting my car. But once I saw it all, everything clicked into place. The public nature of it, the theatrics, the certainty in her face. She thought she was documenting my failure. She did not realize I had already documented hers. After I left, the silence did exactly what I expected. The first 3 days, nobody called because they believed the story they had told themselves. They thought I would be ashamed, maybe cry in some parking lot, then eventually come crawling back asking for forgiveness or help. That is how entitlement works. It interprets your silence as surrender right up until its own structure begins to fail. Monday afternoon, one venue warned that the insurance file on record had expired and suspended upcoming deliveries pending correction. I knew because my mother had once routed all those notifications through the same account she later forgot I managed. I let the warning sit. Tuesday, the scheduling software went dark because the backup card had been removed and the main card declined. Without that software, they were suddenly juggling delivery dates, return counts, setup windows, and inventory notes through old text threads and handwritten scraps. Rob called twice. No voicemail. Tate texted me one line. Dad says stop acting crazy and log in. He had used the wrong parent because he was panicking and not thinking. I almost smiled. Wednesday morning, my mother called at 7:08 with a voice so soft it would have fooled a stranger. Honey, call me back. There is some confusion with the warehouse account and maybe the venue insurance file. I think your card might still be attached somewhere. Confusion. That word. Not thanks. Not. I realize what you've done for years. Confusion. By Thursday, Rob left a rambling voicemail swearing he had not meant what he said at the barbecue and asking whether I could just spot the company enough to get through the weekend, because if one delivery was missed, everyone would suffer. Everyone. It is always everyone once the target stops absorbing the damage. I did not reply. Friday. Tate finally called in a voice stripped of all swagger. He needed money for rent. Mom could not help. Business was weird. I asked whether he knew why. He did not answer. Instead, he asked what exactly I had been paying for. I sent one cropped screenshot, a few lines only. His rent twice, warehouse electric, fuel, vendor software, one linen replacement order. Underneath, I wrote, since everyone is suddenly interested in contribution. He went silent for hours. Then he texted, "What is this?" I answered a sample. The next morning, my mother called 6 times before lunch. By the 6th voicemail, she was openly begging me to explain what I had turned off. If this is some kind of lesson, she said, fine. Lesson learned. Call me. That was when I printed the full packet. Not because she deserved one last chance to understand, because I wanted the truth in a form she could not interrupt. I assembled the packet the way I would prepare a documentation for a difficult client meeting. Clean, dated, indexed, 30 pages at first, then 34 when I decided to include supporting screenshots from separate accounts. A cover page with categories and totals. A timeline stretching back over 2.5 years. Separate sections for direct business support, household expense coverage, personal transfers to family members, unpaid labor estimates, and emergency interventions that had prevented obvious public failures. At the end, I placed one photo, the banner over the garage, my mother by the grill, Rob on the patio, Tate mid-laugh. I printed 2 copies. One for them and one for me. I had not yet decided exactly how I would use it, but the universe nudged that decision along when my grandmother Elise left me a voicemail after church saying bitterness would poison my spirit. She said my mother may have spoken harshly, but she was under pressure. She said counting money after giving it was ugly and unladylike. She said if I had truly been generous, I would not be keeping score now. I called her back not because I expected honesty, but because I wanted a witness to what I would say next. "You were right," I told her. "Generosity does not keep score. Accounting does." She inhaled sharply and then did what she always did when cornered. She pivoted toward respect. "You should not be speaking like this about your own family," she said. I asked whether family was the word we used for people who laughed under a banner calling me a freeloader while standing on a system partly funded by me. She did not answer directly. None of them ever did. An hour later, Tate texted 2 words. "Talk now." I replied with 1 line. "Monday, noon. Public place." My mother answered almost instantly. "Home." The speed of her reply said everything. She still thought private space was an advantage. She still believed walls and family titles would give her leverage. "No," I typed back. "You wanted an audience when I left. You can have one when you ask why." We met Monday at a diner near the interstate where truckers ate breakfast, and nobody cared if a grown woman looked like she had not slept. My mother arrived early. I knew, because when I pulled into the parking lot, her SUV was already parked crooked near the entrance. Rob came with her because of course he did. Men like him never believe a woman is serious until another man is present to absorb the shock. Neither of them ordered food. I sat down across from them, placed the packet on the table, and slid it forward. My mother frowned at the stack of paper as if it had personally offended her. "What is this?" she asked. "The difference between your story and mine," I said. She opened it with the confidence of someone expecting emotional nonsense. That confidence disappeared almost immediately. Her eyes dropped to the total and then snapped back up at me so quickly it looked like the number had slapped her. Rob leaned over, scanned the first page, and muttered something under his breath that sounded almost like a prayer. Everything was arranged so there was nowhere for performance to hide. Dates, line items, bank references, software invoices, utility payments, vendor deposits, screenshots of texts asking for help, notes on late insurance filings I had corrected, details on bookings I had salvaged after double entries or missing contracts. Even conservative estimates of hours spent rewriting customer communication and rebuilding event packets after my mother had rushed through them. She flipped a page too hard and said the numbers were inflated. I asked which part. She jabbed at a software charge and said that was for the business, not for her. "Yes," I said, "your business." Another page. "These fuel transfers were temporary. 3 times over 3 months," I said. Another page. "This labor estimate is subjective." "Extremely conservative," I said. "If I had billed at standard consultant rates, that number would be much higher." Rob had gone visibly pale by then. My mother tried the first defense I expected. Families help each other. That does not make this a debt. I held her gaze and said something I had wanted to say for years. "Interesting. When I lived in your house, you called it freeloading. But when you lived off my money and labor, it became family." Her mouth tightened. She lowered her voice and told me not to do this here. I asked whether she meant with witnesses. Rob tried to cut in with an apology that sounded like it had been practiced in the car. "Sweetie, I was drunk at the barbecue. I did not mean that stuff. I looked at him and said, You did not apologize when you sobered up. You apologized when the accounts started failing. That shut him up. My mother changed tactics. Even if you helped more than we knew, she said, you were still living in my house at 29. There it was. The roof as moral eraser. Shelter as justification for every insult. I leaned back and answered calmly. If I had paid market rent to a stranger and kept my money away from your company, you would have lost that warehouse a long time ago. If I had billed you for what I fixed, you would not still be operating. The only reason you got to call me a freeloader is because I loved you quietly. That line hit harder than the total. I could see it in the way her shoulders shifted. Not because she felt guilt. Because she recognized truth when it came in a sentence too clean to dodge. She flipped to the final page and saw the photograph, the banner, the smiles. Hers most of all. Her posture changed immediately. Not remorse. Calculation. You took this for leverage? She said. No, I said. I took it because I knew you would lie about how bad it was. Rob rubbed both hands over his face. So what now? He asked. What do you want? That was the question they all kept asking because it never occurred to them that I might not want anything from them anymore. Nothing, I said. That is what you still do not understand. I am not here to negotiate. I am here so you cannot pretend later that you had no idea what I was carrying. My mother stared at me for several seconds. Then she asked the real question. How much of this can you turn back on? Not are you okay? Not we were wrong. Not how could we have done this to you? Operations. She wanted to know what systems could be revived and how quickly. I answered honestly because honesty had become a kind of freedom. The warehouse can stay on if you pay it today. The truck insurance will cost more now because the lapse already triggered penalties. The venue account may reopen if they trust you enough. But at least 2 planners are already reconsidering because nobody was there to rewrite your emails into something professional. She looked wounded by that in a way she had not looked wounded by the money. My mother always cared most about image. She accused me then of enjoying the situation. I told her I would have enjoyed being respected before it got here. After that, she tried softness. She said life had been hard since my father died. She said she had carried too much and made mistakes. She said we did not need to sit in a diner like enemies. There was a version of me from 2 years earlier who might have softened. The current version had receipts. We are sitting here like enemies, I said, because you threw a party when you thought you no longer needed me. The softness vanished from her face. She asked if I wanted an apology. I said no. Distance. That offended her more deeply than any request for repayment would have. Then she did what controlling parents always do when they lose direct power. She widened the circle of guilt. She brought up Tate, Grandma, Rob, the employees, the family, the business. Their needs were supposed to flow back into my body as obligation. Instead, I took a second envelope from my bag and placed it beside the packet. Inside were names and numbers, 2 accountants, a small business attorney, a bookkeeping service, an insurance broker, a utility assistance program. She frowned and asked what it was. Resources, I said. That is all I am offering. I stood up. My mother made one final attempt to regain status. If you walk out now, she said, do not expect to come back when things turn around. I picked up my keys, looked down at her, and answered with the calmest voice I had ever used in her presence. The only reason things ever turned around in that family was because I was standing behind you holding the weight. Then I left. I thought that meeting would be the end of it. Instead, it was the point where the whole system began to collapse in public. When you stop being the hidden support beam in a toxic family, the collapse rarely happens all at once. It happens in installments. First the confusion, then the blame, then the desperate bargaining, then the rewrite attempts. My mother moved through all 4 stages within a month. At first, she kept reaching for business language because it protected her from emotional truth. She emailed me a week after the diner with a subject line that read, "Transitional Support Proposal." Inside was an offer for a 90-day contractor arrangement to stabilize operations while the company reorganized. Compensation could be discussed later once cash flow improved. At the bottom, she added that this would also give us a chance to rebuild trust. I laughed out loud in my kitchen when I read that. Rebuild trust. As if I were the one who had hung a banner over a garage. As if paying me someday for labor I had already given for free was a peace offering instead of another manipulation. I answered in 4 short sentences. I am not returning. I am not providing unpaid or deferred labor. Do not contact me for business support again. Any future communication must be respectful and personal only. Her response arrived 12 minutes later. So you will just watch your mother lose everything. I stared at the screen for a long time because that sentence contained the deepest hook she had ever lodged in me. Children like me are trained from very young ages to believe that a parent-esque collapse is our moral emergency. That if they sink, we are selfish for not becoming flotation. For a few minutes, I felt the old reflex rise up. Explain, soothe, offer one last practical fix. Then I thought about the banner, the hot dog sliding down my car door, Rob using my dead father's memory as a punchline, Tate laughing, my mother watching it all with satisfaction in her face. I wrote back one final time. You are not losing everything because I left. You are losing everything because you built a life that only worked while someone you humiliated kept carrying it. She never replied to that message. Not directly. But the fallout kept coming through everyone else. My grandmother mailed me an old casserole dish I had left in the house years earlier. No note, no apology. Just the dish wrapped in newspaper like returning borrowed glassware somehow restored moral order. I laughed so hard when I opened the box, I had to sit down on the floor. 2 days later, Tate showed up at my apartment in North Carolina without warning. He looked exhausted and smaller somehow, stripped of the swagger he usually wore like armor. For the first 10 minutes, he talked in circles. Mom is under a lot of pressure. Rob is messing everything up. Grandma keeps saying the house feels cursed. I let him talk until he ran out of excuses. Then he finally looked at me and said the sentence that mattered. I was awful to you. No flourish, no self-pity, just the words. He admitted he had known I was helping more than anyone said. He just had not wanted to know how much, because that would have forced him to see our mother differently. He admitted that mocking me kept attention off him. When I was in the house, I was the shock absorber. My presence drew most of her disappointment, anger, and contempt. Once I left, she started turning it on everyone else. That was the family system in a single sentence. Remove the designated target and the poison spreads through the room. I asked him if he had ever truly believed I was freeloading. He looked down at his hands and said no. He knew I was doing more than I got credit for. He just thought it would be easier for everyone if he kept pretending otherwise. Cowardly, honest, human. I let him stay one night on the couch. In the morning, he left early for an interview and texted me later to say thank you. That was the first time in years he had thanked me for anything without following it with a request. My mother, meanwhile, was losing ground fast. The warehouse account had to be renegotiated. One truck got sidelined after the insurance lapse triggered a review. A major wedding planner reduced bookings after 2 setup errors and a rude email my mother had sent without me softening it first. One of the warehouse staff quit because they were tired of being blamed for inventory mistakes nobody had properly tracked. The company did not shut down overnight, but the illusion of control did. And once that illusion cracked, people around my mother started realizing how much of her authority had always depended on someone else cleaning behind her. Tate texted occasionally with updates I did not request. The house is being refinanced. Rob missed another delivery. Grandma moved in with Aunt Linda for a few weeks because Mom keeps screaming. I read the messages and set my phone down. For the first time in my adult life, their emergencies did not automatically become mine. That quiet felt unnatural at first. Toxic families train your nervous system to expect a crisis every time your phone lights up. Healing, at least in the beginning, is often just learning not to sprint emotionally toward every alarm. North Carolina suited me better than Florida ever had. One client contract became two. Then referrals turned into a waiting list. I formed an LLC. I rewrote my service structure so deposits were upfront and communication boundaries were clear. No midnight rescues. No unpaid labor because someone forgot something obvious. No emergency fixes without signed terms. It turned out that when people respected my work, my skills became even more valuable. I rented a better apartment after 6 months. Bought a used Subaru in cash. Put herbs on the balcony. Framed one of my father's old recipe cards when my mother finally mailed it to me months later. That call still stays with me. She used an unknown number. The first thing she said was that she was not calling about money, which told me she knew exactly what I would assume. Then she said she had found one of Dad's recipe cards while cleaning a kitchen drawer and thought I might want it. That was the first thing she had offered me in years that was not wrapped around a demand. I told her she could mail it. There was a long silence before she asked quietly if I really thought she was that cruel. I could have answered a dozen ways. I could have mentioned the years of minimization, the public humiliation, the way she let other people laugh at me as long as it strengthened her position. Instead, I said only one sentence. "You hung it over the garage, Mom." She exhaled like a person finally forced to see herself without any flattering angles. The recipe card arrived 4 days later. My father's handwriting slanted across an index card browned slightly at the edges. Chili recipe. A note at the bottom said less salt if Dana is in one of her moods. I laughed so suddenly, I cried. Then I put the card in a frame and set it on my shelf where I could see it from the kitchen. People still ask whether I regret not helping one last time. The question sounds compassionate, but it hides the same old trap. It assumes the most moral person in any story is always the one who sacrifices again. I do not believe that anymore. If someone calls you family only when they need your labor, your money, or your silence, they are not protecting a relationship. They are protecting a system. If a parent requires you to stay small so they can feel competent, that is not love. If a whole backyard can laugh while you are humiliated and then panic the moment your support disappears, the panic tells the truth more clearly than any apology ever could. I was never the freeloader. I was the unpaid operations manager, the hidden payroll, the midnight fix, the quiet reason the lights stayed on. My mother's greatest mistake was not throwing that barbecue. It was believing the daughter she humiliated would still return once the bills came due and the image began to crack. Rob sent me one final message on New Year's Eve. You were right. No punctuation, no apology, just that. I did not answer. Tate and I speak now, carefully, not like movie siblings who hug through years of damage and emerge instantly healed. More like two adults testing whether honesty can grow where convenience and cruelty used to live. He moved out. Got steadier work? Calls sometimes with practical questions. I answer when I choose. That distinction matters more than most people realize. I still have the photo from the driveway. The banner over the garage. Smoke from the grill. My mother in white shorts. Rob on the patio, drunk and mean. Tate mid-laugh. All of them certain they were documenting my humiliation. What they actually captured was the final second before the person holding up their fragile little world got in her car and drove away. So no, I do not regret leaving. I regret staying long enough to confuse being useful with being loved. I regret every time I translated their cruelty into stress, every time I called neglect exhaustion, every time I let shelter erase debt in my own mind. But I will never regret the photo, the silence, the packet, the distance, or the day she begged 2 weeks later. By then it was already too late.